Mrs. Duncan, and we're going to go over some of the highlights and key ideas in Chapter 13, the background of theater going back to the ancient Greek civilization. They kicked this whole thing off. As far as we can tell, they are the true originators of drama, and what we understand about it really goes all the way back to them. So there are many, many terms. Your book will be very helpful, but this is the birthplace of tragedy. We'll also talk about a little about comedy, but tragedy is more the theatrical thing that we're focusing on here. And in your book, you'll see the different things mentioned about Dithyramb and Dionysus, and Thespis, and Choreagos, and the theater of Dionysius, and terms that we still use today, the orchestra and the theatron and the skene. I'm going to pause here a second to our instructional videos, because the only way you can really understand the theater, how it's set up, is to see it. And since we can't go to Greece, I've got this video where they take you to and show you a Greek theater, ancient Greek theater, that still exists. All of them haven't been torn down or crumbled. Some of them still exist, and they can show you the areas that go with those terms. It's better than me just telling you. Things like the theatron is the seeing place, and the orchestra is not a group of instrumentalists. But we get these words, from there. And the skene was what we get the word scene from a play. And you can see how the way this sort of theatron, the stadium, was set up has influenced many of our designs for football stadiums and all kinds of events where we have large capacities. Then there's a real cute little animation, Battle of the Greek tragedians, which will kind of encapsulate some of the progression. The Festival of Dionysus, where that started this off, it was a competition. And then there's a more modern version that uses a Greek theater format to convey a very modern times idea and address a problem. It has gorgeous photo images of some of these things as well. A Roman theater in Spain that's been preserved that follows the same format and design. And it says Athens is often called the cradle of Western civilization, and this is where it was born. And they had these competitions, and it was the golden age of Greek theater during this time. We're talking about BC, okay? Before Christ, BCE, like 490. It was just all right in there. 500 BC. Well, the Dithyramb was a hymn, a song sung at the altar of the god Dionysius. So it originally came out of their worship of this particular god, for a festival god, for when they were rejoicing over the victories that they had, or just that year. And they would have dancing, singing. They had a chorus, usually it was men, and they would have these songs, and it was a festival. At some point, it became a written play, okay? And Thespis is credited with that. So the first thing we know there is 534 BCE. An actor named Thespis wrote and acted in a play that won the competition. Now, it included a chorus of men who sang, but they had Thespis gave individuals a role, and that's why we call people in drama thespians. We borrow all the way from that word. So it means actor. And so these early plays were performed with all male casts. Women were not allowed to perform, and the men had to play the women's roles. Now that seems really maybe odd, maybe not. They did that in Shakespeare's time too, but they wore masks, as you can see from this picture. So they would wear these robes, and they would just change masks, and that helps with the whole, illusion. And there's some pictures of that in your book as well. A choreagos is a sponsor, or and we still need sponsors today for the arts. It would be a wealthy citizen. This competition was it. It was the biggest thing going in Athens every year. And so there would be playwrights. That's who write the plays. Remember, they would submit their play idea and read parts of it, and the city officials would pick 3, and then they say, you're going to be the final 3. And then here's your sponsor, this choreagos, who will finance it so that you can, do this all year and get ready, pay for your costumes and your salaries and your actors. And they'd sit in and watch, to see how it's going, because to win a competition was a great honor. So it was like the the iron bowl of Greek civilization, but it happened in the theater. The theater of Dionysius was the really big one there in Athens, and it could seat as many as 17,000 people. And the orchestra was the dancing place. The seating area was the theatron, the seeing place, and the building behind the orchestra, that was the skene, the scene, which held the dressing rooms and the storage spaces. So they didn't have a lot of scenery, but they did have some, and it was focused a lot on the words and the storyline. And the storylines all had to be based on the Greek mythological stories that they had about their gods. So the way they organized it is different from the way we organize modern drama, which is into acts and scenes. They did have lines, but they would have a prologue, which is kind of like a pre-introduction, a parados, and then that's sort of like another type of introduction, and then they have episodes. But they would be surrounded by these musical elements, so the Stacymon and so forth, and the Exodus, of course, is at the end. We'll come back to characters. Let me pause and show you what this looks like in the play we're going to be studying, Oedipus the King. Okay, here we're looking at the script of Oedipus the King, Oedipus Rex, and you can see there you got your list of characters and the scene. Let me get to the next page. So if you've never seen a script before, which hopefully you have if you read Trifles, but this is a little more involved. This is a full-length play, not just a short one. And you have the prologue, and so you have some dialogue here that sets up the background for what's going on in Oedipus. He has his lines, and notice that the lines are all really long in these plays. They're not much like real conversation, so they're more like little speeches, and they're very pronounced. We have a performance video you can see of this too, and that helps because it's meant to be performed. So he starts out, my children, why have you strewn yourselves before these altars? What's going on? What do you need? I've come to hear you myself because, I'm your king. And then he says, priest, would you speak for them and tell me what's the matter? And so the priest goes on and explains all that. So they're giving the background, and you got to read and find out because there's a big problem. Okay. And then Creon. Now notice there's only 3 actors here, Oedipus, priest, and Creon in a scene, and that's because it was written that way. Typically they only got 3 actors to play all the roles in addition to the chorus. So it went from 1, and that little animated video shows this 1 actor to then being 3, and that's we'll go back to the character page in a minute, and you'll see that the protagonist and the antagonist and the derogatus. Okay, then we have our parados. So you've got the chorus comes out, and they can take on a lot of different roles. They have their music broken down into strophe and trisophe, and they're going to give some more background. Sometimes they take the role of a character, a general character, like the townspeople or the crowd. Sometimes they take kind of a more prophetic or a narrative role, because they say in strophe 2, now our afflictions have no end. Now all our stricken host lies down. So they're speaking as if they're part of the people of Thebes, and then they tell you a little bit more about the plague that's the problem there. Okay, now they didn't use the word episode, but that's really what it should be here for scene 1 is episode 1. And so it picks up with Oedipus. He has a long speech there, and then you have the Choragos, who actually gets a speaking role, and then Tiresias, who's a prophet who comes in and speaks. So you've got your 3 again. Okay, and then there might be more than 3 in the actual scene, but someone's going to have to exit and go change masks and come back in. And then you see your chorus coming in again. So it kind of just goes round and round like that. So with this limited group of characters, you're going to have your main character, or actor rather, who's the protagonist. That's going to be your main one. So in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the King, it's Oedipus, right? He's the main character. In the not all the plays are named for the protagonist, but usually the tragedies are. So that's even true in some of Shakespeare's, because they're called what? King Lear, and they're called Hamlet and Macbeth, and it's the name of the protagonist in those cases. Then you have the second actor, the deuteragonist, and they didn't even do antagonist yet. Do meaning second, third, tri, agonist, and they would sometimes have to rotate around their roles. So they limited the number of actors, but not the number of characters. So the deuteragonist might be playing a small role and then turn around and play an antagonist role. So it's a little bit different from our expectation. And then you have the chorus there that would comment on the action of the play and fill in and narrate, of course, while they're doing scene changes and while they're doing any mask changes or anything like that. All right, so those were that's a lot more limited than what we have, different structure, but this is how it started. Okay, key thing in tragedy, the word tragedy is trigoida, meaning the goat song, and part of the ritual originally was to sacrifice a goat. And so there's always going to be a death, and it's going to be not a goat. It's going to be people in the play. It doesn't always mean the protagonist dies, which happens all the time in Shakespeare's plays. But there's going to be a loss. There's going to be a sacrifice. For Oedipus, it's not his death, not yet. That will come later. But there will be a sacrifice that he will have to make in order to solve this problem of the plague. And in the middle of that, there's all these different things that are going on. So why would we watch something? The word like this, tragedy means an unfortunate or disastrous turn of events. But it wasn't necessarily just that, like we're watching a sad a sad story. Why would we do that? There would be virtue that came from hardship or wisdom from suffering. So it was designed to help us understand life, or the Greeks, and the reasons for the suffering and the daily dilemmas they face. So it was redemptive in that sense. And the tragic hero would always be in this time, an extraordinary person of noble birth, or someone who's risen up to great heights, but yet they have enough flaws or whatever that we can empathize with them. We feel, the audience is supposed to feel some empathy, some sorrow. And that enables us to have catharsis because they have a tragic flaw. They have a character flaw. They make a mistake, and we can relate to that. That's their hamartia, their hubris. And so it could be pride. That's a common one. Their hamartia is the flaw, the fatal flaw, and hubris was the too much pride, too much thinking, oh, I've got this, I can handle this. And we'll see that in Oedipus's speeches. He's like, no, come tell me, I can handle it. I'm good. I did all these other things in the past. I'm so great. I can do this, and I'm committed to you. And he does it with a good intent. He wants to solve the plague for his people. But it becomes his downfall. And I think once you read the play, you'll realize why we feel sorry for him. Things that happen that were outside of his control. Okay, so let's see. What's the next one? The peripetia, the radical reversal of fortune. This is still so popular. We'll see this in the modern tragedy, A Doll's House, this real reversal of events. And then there's this anagnorisis, hard to say, in which the hero goes through a process of self-examination to recognize his or her true identity. They suffer, there's punishment, it seems worse than it ought to be, we feel sorry for them, but he learns something from it, and he solves a problem for his community, and resolves something for his community. And so there's two really key ideas there, the catharsis, that this is supposed to benefit the audience. Two emotions that are supposed to be kind of conjured up and get released are pity and fear. Pity for the fact that this hero has experienced this misfortune, and fear that it might also happen to us. It's going to be that universal. So we don't have to be someone great in a position of being a king to have struggle with some of the same kinds of underlying issues. And that's what makes it great drama, and have a message that's for all times and not just for people living in 500 BCE. Well, in this case it was 400 BCE. Okay. And there's a little spotlight page on it that gives you an overview of the storyline, which I think would be very helpful to you. So that's, I think, page 263. All right, then we have some scenography. We can pretty much, you can skim that. We're not going to focus too much on that, the mechani and the dos ek machina, but they're on the bottom of 260. I think if you just look at those, they're just some scenery things. Some devices that they used for special effects. Okay, the tragic trilogies. Well, they came in pairs and threes because the playwrights would get to do a set of 3 plays. So a lot of times they were related. That would be called a trilogy. And so I don't know why they said that Oresteia is the only extant, which means existing trilogy, because we have Sophocles' trilogy with Oedipus, Oedipus at Corinth, and Antigone. But anyway, that's what it says. But anyway, the Oresteia, maybe it's the only one left from that time. It says the Oresteia written by Aeschylus is the only extant trilogy, maybe for the festival of Dionysus. And I've read these. They go together. It's Agamemnon coming back from the Trojan War. Remember that? I saw the movie with anybody in it. What was it? Brad Pitt. Troy, the big battle between the Greeks and the Trojans. He comes home. He survives that whole war. And his wife, Queen Clytemnestra, has taken a lover while he's been gone all those many years. It's a long time. And they conspire to murder him, and so that happens, and then their son, that's the end of the first one, Orestes, has to come back, and the gods tell him, you have to avenge your father's death. That's how this works. And so he does that. Though it means killing his mother and her lover. And then now there's like, wait a minute, this is not right. You're not supposed to kill your parents, your mother. So the Furies of vengeance are going to, the goddesses of vengeance are going to, want to have him killed. And he's like, wait a minute, I did what the gods said. So it's the last one is revenge versus justice kind of thing. So it's quite a story. They all link together, and they teach something about life, there. So it kind of defines between what's justice and what's revenge, and how is that decided. And when you're caught in that pickle of what's the right thing to do here? Neither one of these is right. I can't not avenge my father, and I don't want to kill my mother, and but the gods told me to, and now the other goddesses are mad at me. So what do I do? So that's kind of heavy. So they also had little funny plays to offset that, kind of like those little comic shorts at the beginning of some of the Disney movies. They were called satyrs plays. Which we get the word satire from, later. They're little comic relief plays. They made fun of the gods and the characters, and they were silly, and they would just help everybody kind of have a good laugh from that in between, because otherwise it could be pretty serious and heavy the whole time. Okay, so I don't want to go too much longer. We'll break this in half, but I'm going to introduce you to 3 main playwrights of the Golden Age. These are the ones that everybody should know. Aeschylus, the father of tragedy. Sophocles, who I've mentioned already, who he's known for these characters like Oedipus, particularly trapped by fate. Very well written, very complex characterizations, just took it to a whole nother art level. And Euripides, who had he was very heavy on the thematic side of it, of speaking to problems in society through his plays. And he kind of got in trouble for that from time to time. But I'm going to give you just an overview of some of the plays that are listed that are on that, what everybody should know. It's a national quiz tournament website where they do these not just trivia. That's not trivia, but it's major pieces of cultural information that you should know. These are the gotta know these ancient Greek plays, and they mention Aristophanes right off the bat, and we will come to him shortly. But notice the names: the frogs, the birds, the clouds, and they're comedies, which is pretty interesting. Lysistra, it's hard to say. I've read that one. It is hilarious. The women are so fed up with the men fighting each other, Athens versus Sparta, that the women get the other, I forget which side started it, but the Council of Women get together and say, look, we're tired of our husbands fighting and our sons being killed, so what can we do to leverage it? And so Lysistrata comes up with hey, let's just tell them we're not having sex with them until they agree to stop fighting. And so that's what they do, and it's played up hilariously. Well, here's of course the one that we're going to look at, Oedipus Rex, also translated as Oedipus the King, and the follow-up, although it's the third in the trilogy, Antigone, his daughter. That one's so tragic too, and that one features a female as the main character, which is not common. Then you've got Aeschylus there. That one's not my favorite, the Seven Against Thebes, but that's the one mentioned there. And Euripides is Medea. You'd thought someone else came up with Medea, didn't you? But Euripides was the first one. And of course, he's retelling a myth. He didn't actually invent Medea, but that's a mythological creature, a sorceress. And these others. Matter of fact, this isn't my favorite Euripides one, the Trojan Women. I saw that one performed by Birmingham Southern College. I took students to that just a few years ago. And then the Oresteia, the trilogy that we were mentioning already with Agamemnon and his son Orestes. So this is the kind of stuff that's in that really important list of our culture and foundational things that inform and brought us to where we are. And they launched it and they did such a fabulous job. These plays are still being performed today. And so we have a modern performance of Oedipus the King in our own, in our studies. So they're not just something from way back. Up here is part one, and pick up and dig deeper a little bit with them to finish this out, but I didn't want to go longer than the 20-ish minutes that we're on. So be back at you.